It doesn't work out.
Yeah.
They leave. I'm still at MDOT. I go, well, I got 6 months I could retire. It's been a good run, right? Then the new Homeland Security Director calls me about 3 months in and says, I know you know something about this interoperability stuff. I go, yeah. He goes, Maryland was going to get $23 million out of his grant, PSIC grant. I don't know if you know the story. So he goes, why don't you come and brief me on it? So I get on, I brief him on it. I says, look, the PSIC grant has a few requirements. I go, one is you got to have a plan. He says, the good news is you have a plan because I wrote it. I go, we got to change the cover. I said, but you got a plan. Second thing is you got to have a statewide interoperability coordinator. I go, I don't know what to do there. He goes, okay, thank you very much for the briefing. I said, I'm going back to MDOT, give me a buzz. Okay. 3 days later, I get the call. You want to be the statewide interoperability coordinator? So up like the phoenix out of the ashes. And I spent like 3 more years past my retirement day doing that work, right? So flash forward a few years. He's now the Director of Emergency Management in DC. He calls me up. He goes, John, you got to help me out. I go, what? He goes, I'm going to be appointed by the council, but they're going to ask a bunch of questions about things that they wanted to do, and I got to have an answer. One of them is the council approved legislation to stand up a DC Homeland Security Commission. He says, but the former mayor never wanted to appoint anybody to it, but they're going to ask me about it, so I want to fill the positions. I go, this is wonderful, Chris. I said, how does this affect me? He goes, I'd like you to be a commissioner. I go, Chris, that sounds like being on the cover of the Post during a bad day. He goes, you got to help me out. I go, why is that? He goes, because not only did they pass the legislation, but they enumerated what types of people and skill sets had to fill the 7 positions. He goes, I got to have an emergency management person, a public health person. He says, and I got to have a transportation security person. He goes, and you're the only one I know that does that. So I was a DC Homeland Security Commissioner for 3 years, right? And then flash forward, we both got named to this Washington Metro Safety Commission. So it's interesting to follow the path of careers and how they intersect and overlap.
Like an Italian family.
Yeah.
Well, I only wish Joe P was here because he has a very similar story, and that's how we all met. That's how I met Mike. That's how I met Kelly, right?
Yeah.
Ira, who's on our board.
Yeah.
Right? It was all kind of. But what I think is funny is the kinds of people that stick around are all the same. There's a lot of people been in and out of this board. There's a lot of people.
And those are the people that try to retire and get busier. That's what.
It's the glutton for punishment people.
Yeah, and they can't. And by the way, they can't say no.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
So I heard a definition recently about this, and it was really based on business, but I think it's true in government as well. And it was the definition of an entrepreneur, right? Really kind of a leader. Is a person who takes responsibility for a problem that's not theirs. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You see something, it needs to be fixed, and you just do it, right? And I think that's all of you. I know all of you, and that's a lot of us that have been around this for quite a while. So, anyway, so John, I recorded that. I don't think we recorded that story before. Kelly's never heard that. I don't think Mike, you've ever heard that story, right?
Well, and the same thing.
So
on
the history.
It's all starting to make sense.
And then back to Tom.
Right.
Tom worked for GTE
Years.
and he sold the Maryland DOT headquarters phone system to us. I was the director of administration, so I was responsible for the phone system. So we had a relationship. We knew each other, and they had gotten bought by Verizon. GTE got bought by Verizon.
GTE merged with Bell Atlantic and became Verizon.
That's
right.
Right. And so Tom's getting close to retirement, and he calls me up. He says, I'm getting close to retirement, and he says, I'm thinking about doing something else, but I want to make a difference. I want to make a contribution. So I was like, have I got a deal for you? And at the time, we were looking for an executive director, and so I said, it'll be easy. I go, it's just, it's just a small little group, few meetings. It'll be like falling off a log, right?
And by the way, entrepreneurs are also gullible as hell.
The hook was set, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So
But literally, he called me. I remember the clear spell. I was sitting in my office, and call out of the blue. He said, I'm trying to figure out what to do after I retire. You got any advice? And I go, well, yeah. go.
So anyway, no, it's funny. We gotta, this is a bar discussion as well, but I think all of our stories are really important, right? 'Cause it really is how we sustain. I sustain because of you all and the relationships I have. It's not because of all the money I'm making or whatever, all the hassle I gotta deal with. And we had some interesting hassles. All right, well, let's jump into this real quick. So, one, I want to thank all of you that gave input on the agenda, and Chris and Kelly are going to kind of walk through this so I can sit down and take notes. And actually, as Chris said, I want you to be part of it, not facilitating, which is great. Thank you, Chris. But what we really want to do for a moment now is there's two questions on the agenda there. And before we jump in, the pile of documents you have in front of you are for your reference. John, let me see your pile so I can explain what this is. The first one looks like this is the concept paper the board approved on the formation, the how, what, when, where, why of the institute, which is the purpose for the meeting today. This is Dennis Schrader's draft 2014 vision for an institute of some kind. This kind of serves as a basis for discussion today. I'll let Dennis, Chris is going to facilitate, maybe you can just right there. This was written, you guys probably never saw this. This was an endorsement letter from the Edison Electric Institute that made my jaw drop. This is what we need to do across a dozen sectors, and to your point, have more territory, right? More geographic territory. This explains from the largest trade association in the largest sector the value of the All Hazards Consortium. I couldn't believe it. Signed by Scott Aronson, who reports right to the president, Tom Kuhn. Tom Kuhn reviewed it, approved it, and Scott signed it. It really caught me off guard. I called Scott. I said, Scott, I don't know what to say. That was just unbelievable. Thank you so much. We gave this to DHS, right? And that's what said, okay, we need to sustain this. And that's when they started moving us under the labs, which we've signed 2 agreements, 2 MOUs, basically, one with Idaho National Labs and one with CNA. But apparently there's another one in Chicago, and there's a couple of, but it's a way for them to move money to our projects without going through a big long-term 2-year compete contract. It's really kind of hard.
Well, the other thing too, Tom, is John Tessville worked to get us on the APL.
And we've
had that contract for
I forgot
3 or
about
4 years.
Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab is another one, right?
Yeah, that pipeline's going to dry up.
So,
Right, but still.
okay, so I'm happy John's here. John has lived in the world of institutional fundraising in a sense, I guess we call it that, right? But the whole reason for today is to really look at, I sensed that growth is coming, rapid. I did not want to be playing catch up with other people's money, right? So thanks to Jim Spears, he got the fear of God and John and I early when we had no money about having process. We audit everything twice a year. We have 3 levels of approval. So I, as the executive rebel, I don't approve much, right? That all goes through Tom and the board, right? So we have checks and balances all over. So we really are, I think, over and above the Call of Duty with the way we handle funds, which I think is a big part of when you're dealing with money. You got to be honest and you got to appear honest. Both. I learned that the hard way on that. So let's jump into the icebreaker finally. We're running behind schedule, which is no surprise. So these are on your agendas as well, but I wanted to capture each of you going through this. And why is this important? One, for you all to know where you're coming from, but 2, this is another piece of what we want to capture in our presentation and marketing to our ultimate funding organizations. They want to see, they want to know the leadership. They don't give a crap about what we do. They want to know who is running the show, who's on your board, what's their track record, are they credible? That's what we're going to invest in, right? And I was telling everybody here, my son just went through his 3rd trip raising money, capital. He's looking to raise $10 million. He's met with 35 of the largest VCs in the world, right? New York twice and San Francisco once. And he's willing to share. He had to change his messaging. He hired a company that does this, and they produced probably the most concise presentation of everything, the competitive market, the what do you do, why do you matter, and it's really great. And he's going to give us that playbook, right, which is great. But one of the things the VC says, look, we're not going to invest in you because you're too profitable. You've already grown without us, and we can't get 51% of your company. However, call me Tuesday because I want to invest as a outside of, Schlack and Whack and Pack and whatever the name of the company was, right? But one of the things they told him, I shared this with Mike, one of the things they told him was, it's great to be online and digital, he said, but people want hard goods. So he said, take that thing and put it in. So I'll circulate this around. This is a training product So this is a hard good. It could be a 8.5 by 11. It could be about concise messaging to the innocent bystander. Doesn't know what you do, and it's a way of doing it. So I wanted to show you these are the kinds of things we're going to produce if we decided to go forward with the institute. So my Dennis asked me the other day, well, Tom, what do you want to come out as? Do we want to come out of today with a common agreement on the vision, the mission, which Chris and I talked about, a path forward, and for me, I want to eventually get the top 25 people that are out there that are institutes, right, have a class 1 pitch deck of some kind, and over the next 12 months, I want to go meet with Bloomberg and these foundations we're going to go after and raise $50 million. Okay, that's the vision from my standpoint. We come out here with a prospect list and a plan. Boom, right? But to do that, you've got to be organized. You've got to have good quality literature, and it's got to be simple. So, but it starts with the leadership, and that's what they invest in leadership. They want to know who you are. They want to know what you stand for, what's your background, why does this matter, why should they invest, what's the result this group will obtain. So that's it. So let's go around. Dennis, I'm going to go around the table this way. So I'll pass this around if you just
And
want to.
Tom, there's a timer, just so people know.
Yes, Kelly's going to take
This is
5
the timer.
5 minutes, right?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Okay, Dennis.
Oh,
You can read you can read the question and then answer.
All
We got
right,
2
so
questions.
what has been the most important contribution to the All Hazards Consortium in the practice of emergency management, and what should be the contribution of the applied operations research? 2 things. One is I think the consortium has provided a bridge to the private sector to support the states in an emergency situation that aids in recovery, to be the most the focus. And then I think the contribution of the Institute could be to build private sector capability and capacity to surge in a disaster, which is very hard to do for the public sector in normal times. And the last thing you can, and it's very, very difficult. So you want to have organic capability in the private sector pre-positioned, and that's where the Institute could, I think, be effective. So those are the 2 things I would say.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
I think the answer for me for both of those questions is the same, and that's alacrity. It's the ability of the consortium as a small private nonprofit that's always operated leanly, that has brought together talent with no bells and whistles, minimal red tape to be able to say, here's how we answer that problem, here's how we pull things together. The Fleet Working Group is a great example of that. It was operationalized in something everybody wanted to do, but nobody figured out how do you join public and private and leap over all of those hoops. So we figured out how to do that. We've been doing that for, what is it, Tom, 15 years?
Since 2013.
2013.
Fleet Work Group, but really since
Fleet Work Group since
2005.
2013. But it's the ability consistently to come in and be agile as a private nonprofit to do things that public bodies can't do. And we figured out a way to do that and to stay relevant. We adapt, we reinvent ourselves about every other meeting, and that's not a bad thing. That shows we're being innovative, so that's my answer.
Okay, John?
At the risk of being redundant, I think the vision we originally had with the consortium was to try to marry, let me step back, the Homeland Security enterprise responsibility is at its core a multi-state, multi-jurisdiction, multi-party affair. You're not going to be successful in a major type disaster unless you bring the private sector to bear, unless you coordinate the public sector agencies, and you also bring like the universities and non-for-profits, Red Cross and others into the mix. That is inherently difficult, and you need a middleman that doesn't have a dog in the fight to help do that. And that was the original vision for the All Hazards Consortium, to be that lubricant between all of those parties, that getting cooperation during major events and major disasters is so essential. So I think that's the important contribution. Regarding the second question on the Applied Operational Research Institute, something struck me in how you phrased this question I want to pull out. It says, what should be the contribution of the Applied Operational Research Institute to the execution of large-scale disaster response in the U.S.? To me, that struck me as odd, because execution of a response I did not see the Institute as being involved in operations and response, if you will. I think the Fleet Working Group is involved in operations response. I think the All Hazards Consortium should be involved in operations response. My sense, having read through some of this stuff, is the Research Institute should be more about preparedness and maybe recovery, if you will, the bookends to response, but not actually be involved in response, so to speak. More of the research aspects and that sort of thing, research and planning. So that's something I want to poke at as we develop this discussion, and we will as we consider the the core mission of the Institute. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm gonna just piggyback what everybody else has been saying. And I think really, from my perspective, it connected the dots. And I think, one of the biggest things a corporation is frustrated is when you deal with government. Because, and I know it from sitting with the IAC and the Infrastructure Advisory Committee in New Jersey when we went through Sandy, and I happened to be chair of the IAC at the time, it was just like nobody really wants to hear the private sector. Government gets into the room, they shut you down, nobody cares, but you own 85% of the infrastructure in the state. So it was really frustrating on our part. And then Tom and I was talking, I said, this is a great opportunity how we can break down those barriers because, like you said, there's no skin in the game, there's no financial gain from that. And I think that's what really helped along the way. And I think it's starting to, it was a slow process and it's still a crawl. I mean, there's still, and I think no matter what we do, and you guys know better than I do from a government perspective, it's just certain states just, fail to relinquish that authority and they want to still be authoritative in their decision making, and they shut down their own people, let alone the private sector. So I think to me that's going to be a tough piece when it comes to question number 2, is how is this institute going to really assist both the private and the public sector? Because if you can't get the public or the private sector involved and engaged in this, it's not going to go anywhere, in my opinion. So I think that's where those resources need to be spent. And I think, the Fleet Group was the first thing that really started to, make a difference in how that all happened. But just maintaining the focus and moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
For me, being a private sector person, the most important thing was the framework of trust that was built. Two great, powerful machines, private, public sector, working against one another. It's a standoff that goes nowhere. Working together, there isn't really much that can't be overcome, and I learned that early on with the help of the early founders of the Fleet Working Group and some of the things that we're capable of. So the most important thing is that trusted framework of knowing that everyone, the bottom line is the very people that the private sector is assisting are the very same individuals that are the constituents of the public sector people. We are helping the same people. Mm-hmm. So to work together can only improve the level at which and the effectiveness of the help that we provide. So that's where that's where my passion around this consortium comes from. As far as the Institute goes, for me, being relatively inexperienced and hopefully going to gain the knowledge from all of you on just what those capabilities are, you have to understand what you're capable of. You also have to understand what you're up against. And you also have to understand what you have from an inventory standpoint to deal with what you're up against. And now you start to make decisions on, do I have enough to deal with this effectively? Effectively, to me, comes down to time and safety. And if not, how do I go about bolstering the assets and resources that we do have to deal with a situation more safely, more effectively, more efficiently? So for me, the Institute will hopefully create those playbooks necessary to say is, if you're up against this, first of all, you need to know what you're capable of. And this is how you go about figuring that. I don't know how to figure out what we're capable of. And I'm hoping that people a lot smarter than me
will teach me how to learn what we are all capable of collectively, and then what it takes from a resource standpoint to figure out how long it will take. So for me, that's what it's all about.
Okay, great. Chris?
All right, so I'm gonna ask Tom, as you take this recording and go forward, that there be some heavy editing on this part.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't drive all the way to Philly to
Yeah.
you know,
No.
blow sunshine up skirts. Okay? So, what is the important contribution of hazard
This will be secured in
consortium?
a size, Chris, with pit light.
Thank you. This is gonna
This
be
is our level
this is gonna be a
three-
high OR
This is our
level.
level,
Yeah.
level 3 security.
You know, what's the most important contribution of the consortium to emergency management? I want to take that back a step and say, what's the state of emergency management right now? Okay, it's a disaster. Literally, our disaster response organizations are a disaster. If you go to FEMA right now, you can't even get an administrator confirmed. Okay, they're not meeting their timelines to get money to states for disasters. They're getting ready to go to court with some of the states are going to sue them because they're not paying their bills like they're supposed to. They're not following their policies. Okay, California's got 7 open disasters right now, and money's trickling through there. Okay, that's the role of FEMA. There is no other role of FEMA, in my opinion. It's to move money, okay, through the programs that they have. The operational pieces of emergency response and all that happen at the lower levels below FEMA, whether it be the state, you can argue whether that's a true operational role or another policy role, a coordination role. It happens at the private sector level and the local level is where really a disaster response happens. And in that market space, we're making some inroads and some paths forward with certain industries, right? With the power industry, with the food industry. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of things that are coming out of that. So back that up to the consortium of what we've done. I think we take the lessons experienced. I don't want to call them lessons learned because we haven't learned them yet. The consortium has been able to take the lessons that have been experienced over the last 10, maybe 12 years and have a place where there's a repository for that, where we can share that with people that have lived it and start to come up with some solutions on how to do things better. I think that we've looked at the best practices that are out there and been able to share that across not only states and local jurisdictions, a little bit in the federal government, but particularly across private sector entities. What are some of the things that have worked and that we've been able to bring to other people or other entities within that disaster response or emergency management realm? And the last thing is the relationships. That's really what we bring in this group here, and that relationship piece is so important because as I sat there with Tom listening to this new entity they've moved the NIC into, what do they call it now, Tom?
I lost track of names.
It's not the NIC anymore, it's something else.
NIOOCC,
Something like that, right? But the thing is, the underneath of all that, and Dennis knows this, and everybody, John, and everybody that's worked in government knows this, the worst public servant coming into government is the one that says, I gotta fix this, it's broken, when they walk in the door, right? So we're asking the exact same questions, Dennis and John and myself and Kelly were asking in 2002. They're just reliving the same questions. We haven't come up with the answers. So the consortium's at least been able to carry some of those answers forward to say, hey, here's the things that have happened and the things that have gotten done. And that's not just at the federal level, it's at the state level as well. The contribution of the Applied Operational Research Institute to the execution of large-scale disaster. I'm gonna argue with John on this for a second, and say that it's not. I don't believe it's the research, or it could be the research, or the policy side, or the recovery side, or the preparedness side. It could be, but I think the solutions that we work on really they fill the white space, right? So when I was working for Dennis, we got resumes come in. We don't have positions, but we got resumes coming. People looking for jobs, right? And I got this one resume in, and I called the guy in for an interview. I don't have a position. I called him in for an interview because it was awesome. On his resume, it literally said, I filled a white space in a matrix organization. And I said, you know what, I got to talk to this guy. Because I got to find a place for him, someplace. Because that's what it's about. I mean, this whole thing of emergency management is a huge matrix organization across levels of government, across sectors in the private sector. And what is that? What do I believe the contribution of Applied Research Institute should be in that is how do we take those things that we've been doing and find others where we fill some of that white space in that matrix organization. What do we do to get that letter from EEI? We didn't do anything special. We brought people together in an area where EEI was kind of doing it, the electric utilities were kind of doing it, and we just filled in that space and said, you know, it's the sharing of information in that space where maybe we can help you.
Very true.
And that's what we did. We create this ORL level that then, oh, lo and behold, it's not just the electric utility space, it's the other spaces as well that need that kind of, that thing in that white space that helps the whole matrix work a little bit better. So I do think it's part of the response, John, but I don't think it's us doing response. I think it's us looking at the different facets of the matrix within here of emergency managed disaster response and all that kind of stuff and saying, what are the solutions? And to Dennis's level, why did we create this All Hazards Consortium to be the RDT&E, right? I mean, I distinctly remember that conversation. Military-minded folks, we do RDT&E in the military, right? We need that in the private sector or in the government sector to come up with the solutions to actually do the requirements development part of that, where you have other people that do the other pieces, right? So I see that being the piece for. So I'll leave it at that.
Chris, Sandy?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, I'll just say I'm really glad we did this.
Oh, Sandy, you passed?
I passed.
Yeah.
You passed, okay.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we did this session because Tom, we've got to, I think what you said about, all this is recorded. The answers here have been just, in my mind, spot on, and I wrote a lot of what you guys said down, and because to me, I look across, to Chris's point, I look across this great nation of ours, and I see a landscape of hardened silos, and those silos they get more and more hardened as we get more and more proficient at what we do. It's kind of this thing, and the public sees this proficiency, whether it be technology or in corporations, and they're getting more and more lean and more efficient and more effective, but that just makes that silo wall harder and harder, and I love that term, matrix organization. We're becoming this, in fact, I get in late last night. I turned on TV and The Matrix is on, and it's one of my favorite movies, and it's actually got a really interesting message about how we're going to make this virtual world so real that we're actually going to fall into it, and we're going to become part of. We're not going to know whether we're virtual or real at some point, but the public's expectation about what we can do is so vastly different than what we can actually achieve, and it's because of those silo walls, and we're not doing enough to break them down. But what Dennis said about the All Hazards Consortium being the private sector bridge to the states, those are the major, to my mind, the major silo walls is the private sector, government, NGO silos, and then the state silo walls, which is the biggest and most dramatic weakness in this nation, is that we can't break those silo walls and bring states together in a major disaster. And we saw it in Katrina. We're going to see it in the next big disaster. And the public is going to be shocked because they'll be like, we got the richest, most powerful nation in the world, and we can't bring those folks together to the aid of the people who are suffering in a disaster. That's our biggest problem. Not that we can't do it, but that we have the richest nation in the world and can't do it. That is the problem. And so what has the All Hazards Consortium done is it's shown us, it's shined a light on a solution to that, which is, it has burrowed through those silo walls, particularly with the private sector, and it's because people lived in those silos and knew how to connect across there. And but here's the problem, right? Is that everybody's looking for the magic bullet. Everybody's looking for the tech solution. Guess what? There is no tech solution. It's a brute force solution. That's the problem. Is it's getting people together and getting them and taking their time and building those communication pathways, and then throwing those use cases into it and building it bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that, I think, is the magic. And I think this institute could figure out how to scale it, because we need to scale it. FEMA has no idea, none, zero, nada, blupkas, zippo. And the states are the same way. Some states are doing it kind of marginally okay, but if you look across the states and look across everything they're doing, you have a hard time shining a light on anybody that's doing it well. And this place does it well, and we need to do more of it, and we need to teach others how to do it.
You know, I did not take Kelly for a Timothy Leary guy. Tune in and drop out. All right, got it. Yeah, the Matrix.
You know, it's funny,
Exactly.
when I first went to Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, I mean, there's a lot of smart people there. A lot of people way smarter than me. I definitely didn't have enough letters after my name, yet I survived there for 10 years. But I preach this all the time, and it touches on it's relevant to what you said. People, process, and technology. And it needs to proceed in that order, because we buy technology all the time.
Right.
And we ignore the people and the process issues.
That's right.
And then the technology doesn't get used, it falls on its face, it's horrible. And the technologists don't understand that, because the motivation of the private sector is to sell you the box. And they're not that interested in making sure it works in your use case.
And the technology turns around and leads the process.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry.
So the people issues are, and the consortium it is another way to describe how we've been successful, is the people issues are developing at its core trust amongst parties. And we've been a convener which brings people from the different silos together and develops trust. But that's not enough, because even if well-intentioned good people have a level of trust and want to do something, they have to go through a process in which it yields a product. And that product is an agreement, an MOU, a set of requirements, an RFP, but there's got to be some product that's the tangible output of that trust. And then you go deal with the technology.
Right.
And if you've done those two things first, then the technology might actually be spot on and might actually solve the problem.
Right.
And I, you know, it's been a central theme of my work over the last several years to try to do that. And the people in the process parts are harder than the technological part.
They're infinitely harder, and that's why people don't do them.
Yes.
And the other reason they don't do them is because the people part takes time. And if there's one thing that nobody has, and the fact that you guys are all in the room on a Saturday in July is pretty amazing, because it was tough for me to give this day up. I don't have a Saturday. Not in July, not in any goddamn month. I do not have an hour to give to anybody for anything. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna take people's time in this endeavor. We better create value there. They better walk away from it. Every time we touch them, every time they get into a conversation, they're gonna walk away saying, that was worth my time.
Right.
Maybe I'm gonna save them time on the back end. That's the best way to add value, is just say, oh, because I was in this conversation, it's gonna make my life easier in the future. And that's our challenge, is we can't just get people in a conversation and talk, and then they ring off and we promise we're gonna do all these things. And then the next time we get together and say, the next time we meet, we're gonna do these things and it's gonna get better, and we keep promising things and never delivering. We gotta deliver from the first conversation.
So, Tom, one thing I was going to ask, I don't know where it is in the agenda, maybe it's when you get to Chris's part in the mission. We got to talk about not only what should it be, but what we got to be careful of not to get into. And I got a list of things, so when the time comes, I want to talk about that.
Bullet number 3. The Schrader don'ts.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Tom, can I take a crack at this?
Yeah, John, go ahead.
So the one thing, the contribution that I think we've spoken about it. It's about the bridge that we have built between the private sector and the feds and the states. And again, everybody, we've just gone through that, how difficult that is. We take that simple little sentence there of that's our differentiation, has been the most difficult thing I have ever experienced in my 30 years of working. I said, I told Dennis, I told Tom, I said I would install ERP systems, SAP, all day long versus going out there and getting a group of 25 people together in a room, just trying to get those people in a room and then trying to get them in a succinct fashion to make decisions and move the ball forward and to agree upon anything. Try to do that and see how hard that is and see how good you are at doing that, because that is the most difficult thing I have ever experienced in my life. And we just say that, you know, we built the bridge between private sector and state and local. There isn't anything any harder than that to try to do. I don't know what everybody's experiences are. Maybe I'm just not a people person, and that's fine, but I'm telling you, that is the most difficult thing, and bar none of what the AHC has succeeded in doing. Second point, though, is that the contribution to this whole idea of operational research, to me, and I don't know if Doug Mon actually created it, I don't think he did, but this whole idea of a valley of death. Okay, and I don't know if anybody has ever seen the chart. John, I know you've seen the chart, you've used that chart, where you have the institutions and you have all this government spend on the left-hand side, and you got this big river in the middle, and you got the private sector over on the right-hand side, and it never, that extreme amount of billions that go into that left-hand side never trickle across any type of bridge to that right-hand side, into the commercial space, into the operational space, into anything that is useful, that doesn't get put on a shelf, and you say, boy, that would have been nice to have, okay? And I think the AHC, and you know, for its ability to operationalize the solutions in the is the only reason that we're sitting here, you know, taking up a beautiful Saturday in the middle of July, when, you know, half of us could be at the beach or anywhere else that we could on this day. But I think that's the difference, is that the AHC has to continue to enable, through that trust mechanism, the transformation of the institutional dollars and solutions into the right-hand side, into the equation. Monarch bucketizes things, and I'm sorry I'm so tactical, and I drive Tom nuts, and I know we have some terrific thinkers here, and when I come out, and Tom will call me on the way and say, what do you think? And I'll say, what the hell are we doing tomorrow? You've had terrific discussions with the board leaders. What is task number one that I'm gonna be freaking doing tomorrow with all that great guidance that I just had today? All right. So really, in contested, John, you brought one item up. The whole, you know, there's four. I see 4 buckets that we can do in this operational research space. Whether there's only 4 that I see. If anybody has any other ideas, I'll take them. But there's the validation of products. Okay, you got the left side, building products. Does the right side even want the goddamn things? All right, so that's one point of view. Okay, or one aspect that we can take in terms of, you know, that we can be good at. There's the development of the products. You know, can we drive the right-hand side into the left-hand side of across that river and develop products that the right-hand side needs? Okay, you know, imagine that you're actually building it for some request that's coming from the private sector. Okay, that's the second piece of what we could be doing. We could be providing the third bucket I saw was informational services. What are people doing out there in all these different areas? There was Tom, I don't think you have time for it, but there's a whole, in the electric sector space, there was a project that we dealt with APL, and they wanted us to figure out the key electrical cyber issues that were going on in that space. Here, there was a whole project being done by a group called EPRI, NESCOR. I don't know if anybody's heard that name. $10 million. We had $40,000 to do the project. They had 2 years, $10 million. They had a beautiful write-up on 128 issues that occurred in the electric sector. They had the as is, to be, how this thing could occur, what happened to it, all 128, thousands and thousands of pages of documentation. We go to EEI and say, do you know about it? Yeah, we know about it, but we weren't interested, and they didn't hit our key buckets.
That's value destroying. They destroyed $10 million worth of value.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, and they had some interfaces to the private sector, but it just was one of those that and anyways, after the 2 years, it was disbanded. The group was disbanded. The project team dispersed, and because I tried contacting these people, I wanted to talk to them and say, who the hell did you deal with? Gone. I couldn't find these people. And again, so they were, and here's the big investments from NIST, here's the big investments from DOE, here's the big investments from a couple sources and stuff, but $10 million shelfware right now, and again, because it couldn't get off from that left side to that right side. Are we an informational service to say these products even exist? I don't know, that's one aspect. And then John, to your point, or to your surprise maybe, could we be an operational entity somehow within this research institute? So I just wanted to bucketize. That's Molnar's way of handling things. It's the only way I know how to do it. Those are the 4 categories. Whatever we discussed today, I'm going to put it in one of those buckets and then figure out, okay, how are we swallowing this ocean of the different sectors, and how are we approaching that? And then the third thing, the big thing is, who's the 25 people that Tom mentioned that we're going out and raising the funding. So we got 3 big tasks here today, I think, to at least, probably not solve, but at least talk about. But anyways, but that whole ability to operationalize is the reason that we're here for that second question.
I just think one of the things that John said in there, that bridge between one side and the other, government side, public sector side to private sector side, that kind of thing. That bridge is made out of balsa wood.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And to John's point, I right now will put a $100 bill on this table that says in the next 5 years, that shelfware you just put up there, the next person at NIST, the next other person, when something little happens out there or something big happens out there, is going to come back and say, we need to do research on what are the cyber threats to the electric utilities that are out there. Here's another $10 million, go do the research.
Yep.
And
we'll do it again.
Knows the shelf that was put on.
Right.
Guaranteed.
Hey, I love John's answer, but and this whole idea of left side, right side, and is the valley of death between the left side and right side? Is that you said valley
That's
of death?
the valley of death.
I think that's such a great term, and that's what that's what we have between these silos is we have the valley of death, and
Now, let's be clear. The most tenured emergency manager in this country right now that's doing the job is Mark Gilducci out in California.
Yeah.
He's got 7 years in, right? Behind that is Mike Sprayberry, who's in North Carolina, who's got, I think, coming up on 4 years, right? And Jeff Stern at 5 years. Everybody else is under 4 years.
Well, they keep kicking them out because they're using government cars to take them home from the airport after they've been on the road for
That may
3
be the
months.
case. And the state turnover and all that, and it goes away.
Let me tell you another one. In the Medicaid space where I am now, the average tenure of a person in my job, I manage $12.5 billion for the state of Maryland, is under 2 years across the state. So it's endemic in
You're reinventing the problem.
government. Yeah, exactly. Can I mention one other thing that somebody said? When you might not remember, but I met you in Maine.
He tried to block that out.
At a meeting. And when we were doing the fleet working group, we came to the meeting, you were there, you spoke, and we spoke, and we explained what we were trying to do with the fleet working group. It was John Shaner sort of was sponsoring all that at the time. And I remember you, so the fact that you're still involved is really awesome.
Okay, so let me,
He doesn't.
But you're going to answer the questions too.
I'm
Tom.
going to answer the questions myself, right? So this has been really good. So what is the most contribution the consortium made? The reason you all are here is the most valuable, from my perspective, is sustainment. We have sustained the brain trust, right, of people that have been in government and now in private sector, and then back in government and now in research, right? So that's, in my opinion, we all have different perspectives, right, on the same thing. So here's a perspective. What I see is great talent, great experience, lessons learned but not learned, because government can't sustain it. Elections destroy, I don't want to say destroy, is too hard a word. Elections disrupt the brain trust. It's a constant, right? The Valley of Death. Doug Maughan came in at Aramark Foods right here, like 2 blocks down, and talked to us about this Valley of Death. It's the biggest problem facing R&D in the nation. They can't get it out of the lab into the field. 80% never leaves the lab, and now that's changing, and that's the swim lane the Institute's in. DHS is now looking for better results from those investments, right? Hence the NIP Challenge Grant and what we produce with very little money. But we didn't do that with technology, we did it with relationships. It's because I knew Mike, and Mike knew John, and John runs the RMAGs, and we got into the operational problems, and the Canadian border crossing is a big issue. We're on our 3rd solution revision for that now, right? Simple, but it's sustainment. That's the problem. If you can't sustain it, I don't care if you're spending whatever, and you sustain with people and relationship and trust. You don't sustain with product and technology and policy and legal stuff. And if you look at all the people that come through DHS in the States, all of them, when Mike Sprayberry leaves, right, he's built a machine. The private sector, it was 600 members in his BEOC program. They are all in. When he leaves, who knows what the next governor or will do. They have no structure, and they're talking with us about taking the Fleet Work Group legal structure and putting it into North Carolina to do just that, to sustain it. That structure came from Mike Ambrosio telling me about the IAC, right? Run by the private. That's the only reason it's lasted, I think. It's mandated by law, but if the private sector wasn't in, it wouldn't be there, right?
But one of the success stories about the IAC is not so much the private sector, public sector, and that was, believe me, that was a big component. I mean, at least like you were saying, at least you know who the players are, and you can talk. But it was private sector to private sector. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's so many, interdependencies, and when you talk about the food, it's just not food, it's transportation, it's fuel, it's water. I mean, so there's so many things that combine in that. And by knowing the players in other sectors, made the recovery effort that much quicker. I knew who to call on electric. I knew who to call with water when the Colonial Pipeline almost went down. So when you think about that, I mean, that really stood out, and that's what really was the success of that whole group. And when government saw that the private sectors were really getting together and starting to, have that work, they said, oh, we better join the party because things are starting to work a little bit better. And I think that was a big plus.
So everything we've done, we've learned from you all, right? So the IAC model gave birth to the framework of the Fleet Work Group, right? And to your point, government, Chris, Dennis, John, have always said, don't try to get government organized. Stay focused on the private sector. That's the bug light, and government will, and that's exactly what we've done, right? So let me finish mine, because we're going to discuss here. So the last piece, because I want to hear, John, what you have to say, Mike. So the last piece was, what should the consortium and the Institute execution lawyers do? So I think you plan and exercise the way you play. And I'll never forget Jamie Turner, God rest his soul, told me something. Tom, he was on our board. I said, so Jamie, as a board member, what would you like to see? He said, Tom, I want the consortium to understand is that the professional status of an organization is how well they plan and exercise, and it's all that matters. And it has to be forever, ongoing, sound like Kelly, nonstop, never ending. And you can't do that with make-believe stuff. You got to focus on real world issues. The reason Mike Sapone is here, because he's seen real problems get solved, not some hypothetical scenario that we got together and the exercises that happen, they don't necessarily get done with the AARs. Chris Gelder said, we do AARs all the time. Who's going to take it from there? And I think that's where we agreed in July of 2012 with John Shaner hosting that board meeting. Dennis, you were there. I think some of the folks were there. Mm-hmm. Is we pick up where the AARs leave off. Not on all things, and we'll talk about that. But to me, that was the thing, is if the Institute can create a mechanism to educate, right, ongoing, to provide sustainment and a framework, to build mechanisms that support that, but it's based on people and trust, right? People and trust. Without that, we're just like everyone else. But what makes us unique are the people and the trust we've been able to build. And that, if Kelly's right, that takes time and investment. And you will only get that time if you produce results, not meetings, not agendas, not AARs. You got to show results that affect me. Then I'm all in, right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Mike, you were gonna make another comment before we
You know,
go to
too,
break.
After action reports, and one of the things that I had asked the Homeland Security Director after Sandy is, let's get together, let's get all the sectors in the room, we don't have, and have it breakouts and form subgroups, and I wanna know everybody's best practices and how are they not gonna make this happen again? What did we learn by this? What resources did we need? And we went through this exercise, and they went to the governor, and you know, Christie said, "Oh yeah, it was a great idea," so they funded it. So we brought in an outside company to facilitate it. We got through this whole thing. I wish Joe P was here because he could tell you how frustrated I wanted to shoot the governor. And we went through this. We went through this.
We're gonna edit that part out.
We went through this whole thing. And
Abel, edit that out.
we went through this whole thing. Dynamite reports were generated. I'm telling you, they were the most dynamite reports. They were written in documentation. It was perfect. So I had asked him, okay, where are they? Let's see them. They won't release them. I go, what? No, he doesn't want to release them. I said, for what reason? Who's in lecture you're coming up?
Made
And
things
his-
look bad.
His aides said, and I went right to his office. I said, come on. Now, I didn't see him, he popped his head in, but I said to his chief of staff, I said, why aren't we seeing him? He said, well, if it was any other year, but he's running for re-election. And there was some issues with
same
those
guy that
best
stopped his
practices that it looked like the state was vulnerable. I said, but this is a learning thing. Why?
Guess what? Guess what? The state is vulnerable.
Yeah, but
No kidding.
Big surprise there.
But we're here to help. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all in this together.
If you want to make it not vulnerable, you gotta take these things and do something.
Yeah.
But see, listen, that is a
And they needed the size.
That is a foundational principle of what has made AHC successful. Is the understanding and accepting the fact that government is tremendously risk averse. I mean, and it has only gotten worse as we've become connected as a society, as the news media has trumpeted every failure that you could find. Government entities just will not take a risk. And so anything that's novel, that's outside of the process, outside of the range of things, is never going to get any traction in government in today's day and age. And that's the opportunity for the all hazards community.
You embolden me every time you say something.
You know,
You embolden me every time you say something.
You know, but so my title is always, for the last 19 years, has included the terms emergency management. And if you want to get the attention of an emergency manager, that phrase that you use, Tom, is the phrase. We pick up where the AARs left off. Because there's nothing in my business that is more universal than the fact that we do AAR after AAR after AAR, and we generate these action item lists, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we don't have the bandwidth to follow up on. So that's gonna resonate with emergency managers, that phrase.
They get bigger and bigger, but every time they get bigger, the reason they get bigger is because the things that came before them didn't get dealt with.
Exactly.
And then the next group comes and does it again and says, oh, we have these things here.
That's right.
And the staff that have been in the agency for years look at it and they roll their eyes and say, yeah, it's the same thing I've heard for the last 20 years.
Yeah, and I'm a you know, this sounds weird, but I'm sort of a student of AARs. Every time there's one, I have it on my Google search, and every time there's an after action report, I read it, and I've got dozens of them, you know, in my inbox, and so, but they are, you know, there's a pattern to them all. I could write the standard AAR for any visit. I could write it today.
Yep.
And all you gotta do is change the name.
Yep.
Right? Because and what is the
communication
coordination? Communication coordination. Communication coordination. Okay? So that is our value proposition. That's the value proposition, is communication coordination.
Yep.